Now, at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Miss Tammi Croteau. Miss Croteau, we are honored that you are with us today, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And as Jesse said, my name is Tammi Croteau. I'm one of the learning management officers in our Learning and Development division, and I am really excited to be here with you today for our seed session on one of my favorite topics, building trust and psychological safety. A little bit about me before we get started. I am a bit of a pop culture trivia buff, so let's start with a little trivia question. I first taught this class on May 4th last year. Can anyone tell me in the chat what unofficial holiday we celebrate on May the 4th? May the 4th be with you. Absolutely. Star Wars Day. And it was the perfect day for this class to launch because there's a fantastic example of trust and psychological safety in the very first Star Wars movie. So if you stick with me through the whole presentation, I will share that story with you at the end. I do have a slightly Star Wars obsessed friend group. My goddaughter's name is Leia Sky. Her last name is not Walker. And when I spent a few years in Texas, I lived in the town next to Peter Mayhew, who's the actor who played Chewbacca. Of course, all Texans are neighbors and friends, no matter how far apart you live. But I'm a Floridian now, so hence the musical choices in the beginning of our session. I am a devout parrot head and fan of Jimmy Buffett, who passed away earlier last year in September. And his passing actually showed me what a trusting and psychologically safe online culture his fans, the parrot heads, had built. I saw this really diverse group of people who were bonded by the love of Jimmy Buffett and his music and his lifestyle, unafraid to share their feelings and their grief, and turned to basically total strangers for support. And somehow it helped us all to heal. Having experienced the more joyful side of the Parrot Head family firsthand at his concerts, it was really touching to see the genuineness of the virtual interactions during the sad times too. My hope is that with some of the strategies and tools from this course, that you'll be able to help your own teams to build a similar sense of safety and connection. I've spent the past 9 years focused on people programs in the federal government, employee engagement, leadership development, and personal and professional development coaching. I'm the program manager for our Emerging Leaders program and co-program manager for our SEED series. And I'm also a retired Army officer. Had a very twisty career path that really made the most of the be all you can be motto that the Army had at the time that I entered. I was the first female explosive ordnance commander, bomb squad, in the Washington Army National Guard, and spent several years in careers ranging from the military bands to personnel administration, public affairs, logistics, and even information operations, which I lovingly called social media warfare. And it was a career field that didn't even exist when I first enlisted. So the possibilities for me were endless, and I absolutely loved my 21-year career. And so from me to all of you who do so much to help our veteran community every day, we may not always be the easiest group to work with, and you and your teams may not always hear the gratitude that you deserve, but I, for one, am very appreciative of everything that you do for us. So today, let's jump in a little bit. Again, since you're not able to come off mute to speak up, I welcome you to add your comments or questions to the chat. My teammate, Elizabeth Pravat, our SEEDS program manager, will be monitoring the chat and checking on your messages. She'll either respond to you individually or to the group as a whole, or we'll also pause throughout the session and take a chance to check in with one another to see if there's anything that we've missed that we need to catch up on. You're also always welcome to touch base with me after the class if you prefer one-on-one interactions as well. So today I'm going to do my very best to make sure that you leave the session able to define trust and psychological safety, to describe how they impact your working relationships and your teams, and how communication plays a part in all that. Since we're fortunate to be doing so much hiring and creating new teams these days, we'll also talk about some tools and strategies that you can use to build or develop trust and psychological safety within your work groups, whether they're brand new teams or already established. So what's in this for you? How about a little bit of stress relief and clarity to make your work easier? If that sounds good, stick with me. Even though growth and change are positive and exciting things, they can be really stressful too. Being able to develop that foundation of trust and focusing on building a psychologically safe environment can help to reduce stress, whether you're working together in an office space or remotely from all over the country. by giving you and your teams clear and consistent expectations and processes for communication and decision making. For my fellow veterans out there, it's like knowing the commander's intent and the rules of engagement. I'll show you some tools that can help you to design basically an SOP that defines the culture of your teams, and even some one-on-one playbooks on how to best work with each one of you. So why is it important to build trust at work? David Horsiger is the CEO of a leadership institute focused on developing trust, and he says that a lack of trust can be the biggest expense in an organization. His overarching philosophy as a leadership advisor is that high trust leaders and organizations bring out the best in people and achieve measurable results. We have to be able to give people room to succeed, and that requires trust. The bottom line with trust is that it impacts relationships of all kinds, both personal and professional, and that impacts each of us and our ability to communicate and function effectively. We all want to build and be a part of high-performing teams, and above all else, we want to be able to show people that they matter and know that we matter too. The way we communicate has a great deal of impact on our ability to build trust with our coworkers and with our customers. I recently read a white paper about the benefits of adopting a coaching communication style when it's appropriate. That would be using powerful questions and active listening to dig deeper to resolve issues, involving people in participative decision-making rather than simply directing, and empowering them to be part of the solution. This may look like asking more open-ended questions when you're working with your teammates to make sure all viewpoints and ideas are heard and explored. It could also mean asking more clarifying questions to your customers to more fully understand their concerns. Questions like, what does that phrase mean to you? Or could you tell me a little more about that? The International Coaching Federation researchers found that employees who worked in coaching style environments felt more supported, respected, cared for, valued, and trusted. They received constructive feedback. Their supervisors trusted their judgment and gave them room to develop critical thinking skills, take risks, and learn from their mistakes. Communicating like a coach is just one building block toward developing trust among individual employees and eventually creating a psychologically safe culture. And we'll get into even more on that later. Patrick Lencioni wrote a great book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. If you haven't read that yet, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic for team building. And he developed this model on which trust is the foundation that everything else is built. So the lack of trust, therefore, would be the biggest problem that a team can have. Nothing else can be built effectively if there isn't first a foundation of trust. When there's no trust, people are less likely to ask for help or offer help. They're more likely to make assumptions and mistakes. Communication could suffer or even shut down completely. People might not really like coming to work. And this could lead to a downward spiral in employee engagement and even retention. When I worked for someone who didn't trust their subordinate leaders, it caused a lot of chaos. We weren't empowered to make decisions without fear of repercussions. We just couldn't take action. We were frozen because nothing was clear. And we just didn't speak up because we were afraid. And we didn't function like a team. So when trust isn't given downward, it likely will not be reciprocated upward either. So how do we make this happen? Patrick Lencioni says that the first step in creating trust is to be human. We need to be the one to go first, whoever we are in whatever position. If we demonstrate trustworthiness and show our trust in others and take that small step first, it'll give people a chance to see what we expect and model that back, give people a chance to thrive. Why might it be difficult to follow that advice, to be human, to go first, and just to trust? Anyone have any thoughts to share in the chat? It's a risk. Yes, being vulnerable. That's the word I was looking for. Vulnerability is scary, and it's a challenge. If trust hasn't already been established on a team, it's very difficult to just go in openly and give that possible rejection. Absolutely. Fear of failure. Good ideas. Thank you for sharing that. So worried about grievances. Brene Brown is great. I agree. All right, so let's shift just a second. Think for a minute, if you will, about leaders or teammates or anyone you've worked with who has earned your trust. In the chat, type some of the characteristics or behaviors that those people demonstrated that made you decide that they were trustworthy. I'll give you a few minutes to give us some ideas about that. honesty, integrity, approachable, patient. Very good. All right. So trustworthy people tend to display 9 different traits. And they are, according to researchers, these are the 9. Trustworthy people are authentic. They're real. They're easy to talk to. They're genuine. They're also consistent. Their actions and their words match. What you see is what time after time. They have integrity. And a lot of these are comments that you gave in the chat too. They stand up for what's right. They choose the hard right over the easy wrong, even when no one's watching. They're also compassionate. They think of and feel for others. They express empathy. They're able to put themselves in someone else's shoes, maybe when they're making decisions or when they're communicating. They're also kind. They look out for others, even if they're having a bad day themselves. And they're resourceful. They're the people who are always learning, keeping an open mind, inspiring and supporting others. They're innovative. They share their tools and knowledge. And they're connectors. These are your bridge builders, always looking for ways to align people with ideas and resources to achieve the goals and make the magic happen. They're the people that you can email and ask a question of, and if they don't know the answer, they will know someone who does, and instead of just pointing you in that direction, they'll CC that person on the email too and do an introduction for you. Trustworthy people are also humble. These are your selfless service, people first people, the ones who are able to place the needs of the team above their own without any second thoughts. And I think someone else mentioned this one, they make themselves available to their people. They go out of their way to make time for others. Even if they may be the busiest people you know, they will always have time for you and never make you feel that you're in imposition. Are there any other things that you can think of that we may have missed on that list? You can type some in the chat if we missed any. Leading by example, I like that. Transparency, yes, we talk a lot about that here as well. And they don't gossip, I appreciate that. Okay. Fearless bosses, love it. And they show gratitude. I think gratitude is a great one. Reliability, excellent. All right, keep all those things in mind. We're going to talk about the definition of trust. And what is trust exactly, especially here in our work world? Stephen Covey defines trust as confidence. It's the confidence that you have in yourself, in someone else, in relationships, in organizations, or even in brands. And that kind of confidence or trust is built upon 2 dimensions, character and competence. Those are the dimensions that will be demonstrated by others and perceived by you. How well you perceive them determines the level of trust or confidence that you'll feel comfortable placing in them. The opposite of trust in this context would be distrust or suspicion, a lack of confidence. Patrick Lencioni breaks it down further and talks about 2 different kinds of trust, predictive and vulnerability-based. Predictive trust is the kind that we're most comfortable giving. It's where you've worked together, you've got shared experiences, you really just know what to expect from each other. The trust builds over time because you can't anticipate the other person's reactions. Vulnerability-based trust is harder because it requires you to just go into an unknown group or team and assume the best, assume positive intent, assume that you can trust them without knowing whether or not it's really safe to do so. And to be able to get to the point of being able to express vulnerability-based trust is why we want to define your team cultures as psychologically safe ones. In his book, Speed of Trust, Stephen Covey says that building trust starts with each one of us, and it has nothing to do with our job or our title or our position. Every single one of us can influence change and be that one stone in the water that starts the ripple effect that impacts everything and everyone around us, especially when it comes to building trust. A little story from my military history. When I was in the Florida Army National Guard, we had a field training exercise one summer, and we had set up this elaborate tent camp in the woods in northern Florida. It was very hot, very muggy, and in the midst of it all, the generators running the electricity in the headquarters tent failed. So if you could imagine a room full of upper-level executives in an offsite with no air conditioning and no computers and no technology at all, it was like that, with dozens of Army officers all trying to be in charge and none of them having the skill to actually fix the problem. The one person who did was a brand new private first class, E3, barely out of high school and barely out of basic training. And these senior leaders had no choice but to put their trust in this young soldier. The success of the entire mission was in those hands alone. A generator mechanic in that moment was more essential than a battalion commander. And any one of us could be in a position like that at any time, to have what's needed to be the most valuable player on the team. But you need trust all the way around in yourself, in others, in your organization to be able to step up and make things happen. Trust yourself, trust in your leadership, and trust from your leadership can make a difference. So maybe some of you are not supervisors, and maybe your team doesn't even have a supervisor yet because it's brand new. Maybe you don't quite have that clear direction. And maybe your supervisor or some of your teammates aren't really demonstrating the type of trustworthy traits that you'd like to see yet. In any of those situations, you still have the power to build trust and impact the psychological safety of your team. 3 little steps can make a big difference in building trust. Step 1, it starts with you. Keep the commitments you've made to yourself, whether it's that New Year's resolution to go to the gym and get fit and finally run that 5K, or finally finish those books on your professional development reading list, or blocking time on your calendar for the things that are important to you. Whatever it is, write it down, speak it out loud, find an accountability partner, and then do it, because you matter, because you're worth it, because you care about yourself, and it's time to prove it. And we know that it can be challenging, and we know there are going to be obstacles, and we know life is always going to get in the way of those best laid plans and goals. But think about the example that you'll set, maybe for your family or your friends or your coworkers. Think about the outcome, why that goal is important in the first place, and how it will feel to achieve something that's been that important to you. Step number 2, take what you've learned by following through on your commitments to yourself and apply that to your interactions with others. Step 3, repeat steps 1 and 2 consistently. They make it sound so easy, right? Elizabeth, do we have any questions or comments in the chat to catch up with at this point before we move on?
We don't have any specific questions, but we had a couple of points to call out about traits related to building trust that we didn't have on the list. One being accountability. Folks emphasizing that it's important to hold themselves accountable, but also hold those on their team accountable. Also, non-judgmental. So really kind of having that safe space to be ourselves. And if we make a mistake, we can learn from it and move on. There's no judgment. We're all safe to learn and grow. And then there was some dialogue about technical credibility. So I think depending upon the role, technical credibility may play more of an important role than other positions, but definitely a skill that some admire in the group. And also, again, folks reiterating, if you don't know the answer, admitting that you don't, but knowing where to look for that assistance.
Those connectors, absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit about that non-judgmental culture when we get to the psychological safety section, and the technical credibility and competence is about to come up on the next slide. I think some of you maybe have read ahead a little bit. All right, so we know that first impressions can carry a lot of weight in building trust, especially in service-oriented roles like ours. We decide whether or not we trust someone almost instinctively at times, and we have our own inner tests that we use for determining where we can place our trust. Sometimes we look for certain types of behavior indicators, like these 4 C's, and some of you mentioned it with the competence, technical credibility, or capability. So if I need to earn your trust quickly as a customer or as a teammate, I'm going to rely on these 4 C's. If I can demonstrate to you early on in our interactions that I know what I'm doing, I'm capable, that I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to do it over and over again consistently, that I care about you and what we're doing, and that this is me consistently, and I'm always going to present myself with honesty and integrity, then generally speaking, you'll find me a trustworthy person. Whether I focus more on developing the cognitive trust by showing capability or credibility and consistency, or whether I focus on that affective trust by showing more caring and candor, or a combination of the both, really depends on how well I perceive your needs and preferences. Social awareness is one of the elements of emotional intelligence that helps you to identify the emotions and needs of others. We have tools like the DISC assessment and some others that help us learn more about behavioral and communication styles and preferences in ourselves and others. And that kind of awareness can be helpful in building trust too. Speaking of DISC for a moment, if I know your DISC type, and I know that you're a D or a C for those who've taken the assessment, I'll probably focus more on cognitive trust. But with I's and S's, I'll probably lean more heavily on the affective traits because they're more likely to resonate with you. If you haven't taken a DISC assessment yet, we do have a session from our previous seeds in January, and the link to that is on our website. So you'll be able to take a look there and learn more about that as well and how it can help you with team building and strengthening communication and social awareness. All right, time for a little poll to check your knowledge and see where we're at so far. Let's see what we remember about Stephen Covey and Patrick Lencioni's definitions of trust. We're going to pop this poll up here and ask you how Stephen Covey defines trust. And all you need to do is select which one you think it is. Was it courage, commitment, confidence, or collaboration? And then click submit and close out of the poll, and you'll be able to see the group's responses. And see, it looks like everybody's coming close there. It looks like confidence is the winner, and that is correct. Yes, we did talk about some of those other points as well, but Stephen Covey defines trust as confidence, the confidence that you have in yourself, in others, in organizations, or even in brands or relationships. All right, our second question. Which type of trust, this was Patrick Lencioni's 2 types, is generally easier to give? Is it vulnerability-based trust or predictive trust? We should have a poll launched for that as well. And I see some answers coming in the chat as well, and you are correct. Predictive trust is the easier type to give because it's based on interactions we've already had, experience we've already had. We can predict how others will behave, so it's easier to trust them than to just simply go in knowing. We did not see the poll on that one, Jesse, but we've got some answers in the chat, so we're good to go on.
So one question that did come up in the chat, Tammy, was how can leaders work to restore trust if it's been broken? And I thought that was worthwhile for some conversation.
That is a great question. And that really goes back to going first and demonstrating the trustworthy behaviors. And also, as we get to the tools that we'll work on in the last section of the session, there are some ways that you can really define the expectations within your work group, how you'll communicate, how you'll interact, and being able to put forth that clear direction as a leader is really helpful, especially when you're rebuilding trust. To kind of get everyone on the same page and speaking the same language and coming to the table with the same expectations. It'll really define how people are expected to treat one another, a way to hold each other accountable, if you will. So we'll get into some of those a little bit later on as well. Good question, though. All right, and it looks like we had a little issue with that poll, so we will just move on and talk about the difference between trust and psychological safety. So in this context, we've talked about trust in many ways, and it's a perception, the way you perceive another person's demonstration of those 4 C's: capability, caring, consistency, and candor. Trust is your willingness to give another person the benefit of the doubt. It's a one-to-one situation. In this instance, for example, Bob is the employee, and the situation is about a group of employees who are afraid to disagree with Bob because they think he might freak out if they express a dissenting opinion. So in this case, Bob may have shown that he's competent, he may have been honest, but maybe he was inconsistent with demonstrating caring, or maybe didn't demonstrate it at all. So it's made the employee afraid to disagree with Bob, and they're expecting a big blow up if they express their opinion, so they don't trust him. Can you imagine how this situation could impact the whole team? Maybe other people feel like they have to walk on eggshells around Bob, or maybe that employee had a really great idea that was so innovative and it would have really helped the whole team, but now nobody gets to hear it. That situation would end completely differently in a psychologically safe environment. So thinking back to Patrick Lencioni's 2 types of trust, predictive and vulnerability based, in this situation with Bob, neither kind exists. The other employees predict explosive behavior from him, so they won't trust him, and that experience wouldn't encourage them to even attempt to be vulnerable without going into that situation. So the difference between trust, that one-on-one feeling, and psychological safety is about another C, your culture, the culture of your team. Psychological safety is about the whole group and its operating environment and its processes. It's how much you believe that the rest of your group will give you the benefit of the doubt. In this case, the team has an established process. The employee says, my team expects me to speak up. It's how we do things. So that same employee from the previous slide still has a different opinion than Bob's, but in this case, the team and the employee knows that everyone will have each other's back, even Bob, because they've established a specific way of operating. The team has established a communication process, a way of interacting and operating, a set of expectations. They value every member's contributions and opinions, and they welcome opposing viewpoints because everyone agrees that that's a great way to learn when it's done constructively. This is conflict at its finest, and we have to sometimes not look at conflict as a negative thing and instead consider it a passionate pursuit of truth. So when we're exploring potential solutions to problems or ways to address situations as a team, it's good to get those different viewpoints because you'll get a more well-rounded perspective on how to approach the issue. So in this psychologically safe environment, that employee now would be far more likely to speak up in a caring way and let Bob know that they have a different opinion. Now there won't be that fear of explosive conflict, so the team would be more likely to brainstorm openly, to try new ideas, to have open discussions, and learn together, even if they're learning from a failure. This is where we can move from predictive trust to vulnerability-based trust. Once the team has established that way of operating or rebuilt the trust, as we were talking about earlier, then we know this is what's expected. This is how we're going to behave. So even though you may not know the people and know the team, you know the SOP for behavior on the team. You know you can go in there and trust people because that's what's expected. You know how they're expected to respond to you. And you can go into the group more open, more willing to extend trust without having that pre-existing knowledge of the individuals if your processes are clearly defined first.
So Tammy,
Amy?
if I could just
Yes.
if I could just jump in here, we had a couple of folks chatting about the virtual environment and doing this type of connection in the virtual world and how that might present some challenges. And I would just like to offer that it is different in the virtual world, but it's not impossible. It just takes a little bit more intentionality to connect through virtual means, to set up meetings where cameras maybe become the norm so that you do have that more personal connection and you can learn to read body language and facial reactions. That's sometimes how you learn things like people's pet peeves, is just seeing their reaction to specific situations. So again, it's not impossible. It is different in the virtual world. So I just wanted to call that out.
Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit more about that too, but right, using our technology to our benefit in the ways that will work to increase our communication and our connection rather than building those walls. It's definitely one of those leadership decisions that can be put into place, or as a team comes together to build the social contract that we'll talk about in a little bit as well, and establishing communication practices. It can be a big help in establishing that safe environment. Just to see one another once in a while can make a difference, and hear one another. So as we're moving into talking about psychological safety, we have to talk about Amy Edmondson. She is one of the leading authorities on the subject, and she defines psychological safety as a belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Psychological safety is not a new concept. Amy published her first research in 1999, and since then she's written books, created courses, presented some really great TED Talks on the subject. But earlier research dates back as far as the 1960s, when psychological safety was considered essential for successfully navigating organizational change. And when we think about all the change that we go through on a daily basis, knowing that you have a safe, connected team can make all the difference sometimes. Psychological safety really hit the news in 2015. Google launched Project Aristotle to research why high-performing teams did so well. And they found that it wasn't just about technical ability or any of the things you might think. It was that psychological safety existed on their team, and it was linked to information sharing and learning behaviors. Team members who feel safe are willing to talk about their mistakes, to share their ideas, to ask for and receive feedback, to disagree, to brainstorm, and to experiment together. They might even have a process for making decisions together. They found their work more meaningful, and they were not afraid to fail together. Psychological safety is also linked to peer support and role clarity. If you know what's expected of you, you'll feel more confident speaking up, lending a hand, encouraging and supporting others on your team. And all of that probably contributes to the positive impact of psychological safety on employee satisfaction and that feeling of engagement or connectedness that often encourages people to stay with an organization. Leaders are ultimately responsible for everything that their teams achieve or fail to achieve, and they're also responsible for establishing and modeling a psychologically safe culture within their organization and creating the trusting teams that we're about to hear about in Simon Sinek's next video.
Basically, when I talk about building psychological safety on a team, what that means is leaders create an environment in which the people working in the company, the people on a team, feel safe enough to raise their hand and say, I made a mistake, or I don't understand what I'm doing, or I'm struggling at home and it's affecting my work, or I'm scared, or I need help, without any fear of humiliation or retribution. In fact, they can say these things with absolute confidence that their boss or their coworkers will rush to support them. That's what a trusting team feels like. We've all been on one before. We also all know what it feels like not to be on a trusting team, where we would never admit mistakes for fear of humiliation or getting in trouble. We're never going to say, I don't understand something. We're not going to admit we're scared. We're not going to tell anybody that we're struggling at home, it's affecting our work. And we're definitely not asking for help, because these things make us vulnerable or weak and might put us on a short list for the next round of layoffs. Or worse, my boss, it might hurt my career chances. I won't get promoted because I've said I don't understand something. So we keep quiet. It might work in the short term, but over the course of time, a company where no employee ever admits mistakes, or worse, they hide their mistakes, eventually those cracks grow and grow and grow and cause great damage to the organization and its ability to succeed. So this is a leader's responsibility. It's a leader's responsibility to create an environment in which people feel psychologically safe. And if somebody makes a mistake, we can help them fix it. As Alan Mulally used to talk about when he took over Ford Motor Company, you are not the problem, you have a problem. And if you can tell me the problem, we can all rally together to help you fix it.
I love that last quote. You are not the problem, you have a problem. Tell me about it so we can rally together to fix it. Words matter, and they can make or break trust. And they can also help to build a psychologically safe environment. But they're just one tool that we have to work with. When COVID changed our work environment a few years ago, we had to find more tools quickly to keep our teams functioning and connecting. We had to learn on the fly a lot. Strategies for building trust and psychological safety 5 years ago, when more people were together daily in the same space, were a little different from today in our more remote or hybrid environments. Some of us may never meet our coworkers in person, yet it's still critical to find ways to connect from wherever we are to establish that sense of community and belonging within our teams. I would really love to hear what some of you have done on your teams. If you can type some ideas in the chat, what are some of the things that you've done to make yourselves feel connected with your teammates from wherever you are that have helped you to build trust and feel safe together? Team lunches?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of responses roll in. Potlucks, they share pictures of their work at home area. They have one-on-one trainings for sharing knowledge with information. Really great to make those connections. Bring donuts into the office when they are able to get together. Group chats. And an escape room outing. That sounds fun. And I was a part of the team where we did a virtual escape room, and that was a lot of fun because we were all
great.
Geographically dispersed. Team lunches, question and answer, guessing games, bingo, a lot of great ideas in here.
I love it. So yeah, you folks will learn a lot from each other in this class, as much as you'll learn from me probably. So if you find any ideas that are interesting, I would encourage you to connect with the person who submitted that idea and reach out and see what you can do to start some of those things on your own teams as well. But like Elizabeth had said earlier, we do have to be intentional, and we sometimes have to be a little creative to find ways to feel connected and to know enough about one another to understand what's going to work to make us feel engaged. Engagement means different things to different people. So it's again with the social awareness and the self-awareness and being able to communicate your needs. So while it may be a leader's responsibility to create a psychologically safe environment, you don't have to hold a supervisory position or title to demonstrate leadership. Every one of us is capable of establishing trusting relationships and contributing to a psychologically safe team culture. I had another military leader many years ago who told me, in the absence of leadership, true leaders arise. Just like our generator mechanic, who, by the way, did save the day and save the mission, be ready to step up and lead when that opportunity or need presents itself. I would challenge you also to not just wait for an opportunity, just be the leader that you are. If you feel that natural tendency, if you've got a skill to share or an experience to share, demonstrate those trustworthy traits and take those steps to make other people feel safe with you. That's a great start, and you will make a difference that way on your team. Amy Edmondson is going to tell us a little more now about leading up, leading from where you are, and what you can do, even as a non-supervisor, as a team member, to build a psychologically safe culture in your team.
If you're not the boss or you're not the team leader, many people think, well, there's nothing I can do. I have to wait for the leader to do something. And the truth is, leaders do have an outsized influence on the psychological safety of a team or an organization. But you have to distinguish between leader, which is a role, and leadership, which is a behavior. And leadership is the behavior that influence others in positive ways. It turns out that any one of us can exercise leadership at any point. The kind of leadership that you can exercise as merely a team member to make a difference in your team is quite profound. And it turns out the same things that I recommend leaders do are things that you can do. Frame the work. You can actually remind your colleagues that we're up against an incredibly challenging, unfamiliar, unknown path ahead, and everybody's voice might matter. Like, you can say things like that. You can call attention to uncertainty, to interdependence, and that helps other people understand that their participation matters. Second, anyone can exercise leadership on a team by asking good questions of their colleagues, even of their leaders. Just ask questions every single time you ask a thoughtful question of a colleague. You are giving that person a gift, the gift of your interest, the gift of your respect, because you are implicitly saying, I think you have something to contribute here. Any one of us can do that. And of course, responding productively is something you can do as well. On a team, if someone suggests an idea, you can say, hey, that's interesting, I'd like to learn more. Wow, you just made it more psychologically safe, and you advance the conversation at the same time.
I love how powerful a question can be. And leading without formal authority is one of the best ways to grow and develop and prepare yourself for future roles. It can be intimidating to lead among your peers or to influence up, but if you've worked on building trust and have established a psychologically safe environment, it'll be much easier to take those steps. I was able to participate in the Harvard Business Review's Leaders Who Make a Difference webinar, and Amy Edmondson gave a mini masterclass in which she talked about the way that we perceive the cost and value of our own voice. And this was really powerful for me. She said that especially in the work environment where we kind of fear the hierarchy, we tend to believe that the cost associated with speaking up is way too high. It could cost us our job. It could cost us our reputation if we speak our mind. So we choose silence because the perceived cost of not using our voice is nothing. But we were all hired for a reason. There's a value in us that brought us here. So she challenged us to switch that cost and value perception and believe instead that what we have to say could often be so valuable that the cost of not speaking up could be detrimental to our success and the success of our team. That's empowerment, and that's how it should feel to be part of a psychologically safe team. Time for our next knowledge check poll. Psychological safety is only a leader's responsibility. Select true or false and click submit and close out of that poll to see the responses. So true, that was an easy one. You are all correct. False. Everyone can contribute to psychological safety on your team. Excellent. And next question. The key difference between trust and psychological safety is that psychological safety refers to your environment or your organizational culture as a whole rather than individuals. True or false? And it looks like we might be having trouble getting that next poll up again. So if you want to throw your trues and falses in the chat, that is just fine too. Correct. This one is true. Psychological safety is about your culture. Trust is more of a one-on-one perception. Absolutely. Elizabeth, is there anything else that we want to catch up on in the chat before we move on to exploring some tools for how to build psychological safety on our teams?
Absolutely. So there was a question a few slides ago, pretty straightforward, but it seems a little kind of like something to really overcome mentally. What if you don't trust your supervisor? I feel like we're talking about so many tools about building trust and overcoming trust, but what's the one thing you would recommend, the first step someone could do to start that road to build the trust, to really open up that relationship to be stronger?
That's a tricky one. I would probably rely on Amy Edmondson's suggestion to ask questions, get to know more. Maybe there's a way to open up a discussion, even if it's a candid one, to learn more about each other. Maybe through a DISC assessment or something along those lines to find out about how that person operates, what drives them and motivates them. Sometimes the more you can learn, it might be misperceptions driving the distrust. But again, it depends upon the situation and if it's a predictive or vulnerability based trust situation. But communication can be a good way to begin to address most issues. And I see, yes, true is the answer. We got our poll going. Thank you for that one. All right. Moving on. So we've defined trust and psychological safety. We shared some steps for building trust, and we talked about how trust and psychological safety, or the lack of them, can impact your relationships and your teams. Now I'll share a few tools that might be helpful for you, whether you're building a brand new team or just looking for ways to further develop trust and psychological safety on an established team. Either way, your team will evolve over time, and these tools can too. This first one that I have up is a personal user manual. And this is a living document that describes your natural preferences, ambitions, skills, passions. It's like a one-page guide to you and how to work with you effectively. These can help team members to understand how to work together well, how to get the best out of each other in psychologically safe, inclusive, and constructive ways. I went on a detail with a previous agency, and one of the first things I was given access to was a folder full of these personal user manuals. They included photos and just told me everything I needed to know to be able to target my communication toward individuals in effective ways and to be able to go into my first interactions with a little more confidence, ready to contribute in ways that I knew would work to build relationships. And writing one of these is a great exercise in self-awareness. Mine's up here as an example with some suggestions for data points that you can include on your team. We use these in learning and development as well. And it's a really great team building exercise. You'll all get copies of the templates for these along with the slides tomorrow. They'll be posted to our Seeds page, and I believe we'll also send some out via email. Just like the personal user manual, the manager manual helps employees know what they can expect from a supervisor and how to best build that important relationship. You've likely heard the expression, employees don't leave jobs, they leave supervisors. We don't want that to happen. So for supervisors, taking the time to build trust by knowing yourself as a leader and providing that knowledge to your employees is a great building block in establishing your foundation of trust and psychological safety. And it's a way for you to do, as Patrick Lencioni said, and go first and set the way for that. This could also be the tool that moves your employees from simply knowing that you have an open door policy to actually taking the step to walk through that door and feeling comfortable enough to come and talk to you about anything. That vulnerability that you can show by sharing about yourself sets the stage for your employees to know that they're safe to do the same. The social contract. This is the fun one. This is where your whole team can come together and really define who you are and how you operate. It'll define your shared values, and values tend to determine our behaviors. It can set some boundaries, and it can clarify expectations for group behaviors. It really establishes your culture, puts it down on paper. So when you're putting this together, every team member needs to be involved in creating the contract. And this is inclusion and psychological safety in action, making the process accessible to everyone, no matter where they may be, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be seen and heard, and that everyone feels valued in their contributions and safe to express themselves. Your core values are in the center oval because everything else should be based on those. You can either determine those first or figure them out from the behaviors that you list in the other 4 boxes. You should keep it focused on the positive, phrase things in ways such as we are always on time for meetings rather than we don't show up late for meetings. That positive feeling is always helpful. Let everybody use their strengths when you're working on this. Referring back to DISC again, if you've got some people-centric I's and S's out there, let them add pictures, videos, whatever it is that makes it feel good to them. Or if you have C's out there who are very compliance-driven, let them take detailed notes and create a spreadsheet that can track the votes and quickly calculate and prioritize what's most important to the group. And if you have your dominant D's there as well, let them keep everybody focused on the time you have allotted for completion of the project. And then everyone should sign a copy. The contract is a symbol of your team's unity. So you'll want to post it to your shared drive or SharePoint site, whatever is your go-to spot. And remember that it can change and grow as your work does and as your team does. So as you get new employees or as your mission evolves, go ahead and look this over a couple of times throughout the year and make sure you're holding yourselves accountable to how you said you behave. And if it needs any editing or adjusting over the course of time, you can always update the same way that you created it. And
Hey,
finally,
Tammi,
yes, go ahead.
Oh, if I could just jump in quickly.
Absolutely.
So I think the social contract relates to a question that I had, thinking back to Simon Sinek's video talking about your personal life impacting your professional career. What if somebody is facing a situation where they are having a personal difficult time and it makes them more reactive out in the workplace, makes them a little bit more not their usual selves? What actions can that person take maybe as they're going through that difficult personal time, or once they've moved on from that, to repair those relationships in the workplace?
I can absolutely relate to that. My elderly mom moved in with me about a year ago, and it was a very difficult transition, and I had to relocate, change jobs, pretty much everything in my life changed, and I was not myself for a few months as I adjusted to that. So I feel for you anytime that we go through tough things. But the thing that got me through was having a team that made it safe for me to let them know, hey, I'm struggling today. And we actually used the personal user manuals to include a data point that said, when I'm struggling, this is how I'd like to receive help, or this is how you'll know when I'm struggling. Because it's not always easy for us to ask for help or to talk about personal things at work, especially. But if one of my coworkers and I think it was Elizabeth, we came up with sort of a code word for when I was sick and trying to teach, I needed a break to cough for several minutes. And so we came up with a code word that we could use, like, hey, I need a break right now. Can you take over? And so we worked out some communication pieces between us to be able to help each other in ways that wouldn't make it blatantly obvious to everyone. So I think, again, with clear expectations and communication and the ability to maybe be able to talk without having to be completely vulnerable and giving all the details of your situation if you don't want to, and understanding, I think knowing each other enough to know what the standard behavior of someone is. So when you start to see those changes, being safe to ask, hey, you don't seem like yourself today. Do you want to talk about anything? Is there something I can help you with? Being safe to have those kind of conversations is a big help. And again, it takes a little social awareness, knowing one another enough to know when something doesn't seem right, when something's out of character, and not jumping to the wrong conclusions and perceiving something differently than it may be. That's a good question.
So I'm hearing ultimately a little bit of vulnerability on our own parts is needed there. Not that we have to disclose what's going on with us personally, but just being open that I'm having a tough time right now. And that can be a challenge just in and of itself, but I think at least kind of letting your teammates know that
Right.
that you're struggling. That's a great first step to repair those relationships and just let them know, like, hey, things aren't going well, or they're not easy for me right now. So I think
Yeah.
that helps.
I think we realized, especially through the changes with COVID, that we bring the whole self to work. And especially when home and work are the same place, it's even harder to separate them. So I think that the way that we interact and the way that we lead one another has probably had to adapt over time to, accommodate more of that full person understanding. You can't just shut off home when you're at work, or vice versa. It takes a while sometimes to decompress and to shift your focus onto other things. And in terms of repairing relationships, if maybe you've had a hard time and you've struggled, I know I feel sometimes like if I've been sick or I've been out for a week or so, I feel horrible that I've burdened my teammates with additional work when I wasn't able to pull my own weight. So I think just being able, again, to have those conversations and pick up and jump in when you can, and being able to repay the kindness in a way. I know if someone helps you, be there for them the next time, kind of going first and helping one another, and just having each other's back. Thank you for those questions. So this last tool is a team charter, and it's kind of a social contract extra version. It adds clarity, and that's what brings confidence in really knowing the expectations of your group's culture. It's more in depth than the social contract, and it can be a really good deep dive experience or exercise, maybe for an offsite. Or you can even attack it one question at a time in weekly meetings. Just look at a few things and figure out where you want to start and build it as you go. And again, all of these materials can and will change over time, and they should be looked back upon periodically, just to make sure you're living up to the expectations that you've set for yourself and your team. Okay, so we're almost done today, but here's a challenge for you. Now that we have all this knowledge and we know that every one of us can contribute to building trust and psychological safety on our teams, what are we going to do with that knowledge? So what is one takeaway from today's session that you might be willing to commit to implementing? Everybody give me a few answers in the chat. And Elizabeth, feel free to jump in and read some of these for us. I see a bunch coming in.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot of folks appreciating the user manuals, the team charters, getting on the same page about communication, encouraging our peers, honesty, a lot of support for the user manual, which is really great. That opens up the door to that little bit of vulnerability that helps us build those initial connections. Trusting yourself, absolutely. Self-awareness.
Excellent. I love it.
Great takeaways.
And every little thing that each one of you do is just adding to making VBA a better place for all of us to be. I really appreciate your efforts there. So now I'm going to keep the commitment that I made to you at the start of our class, and I'm going to demonstrate a little trust and vulnerability by showing you my geek side. And since we have this psychologically safe group together now, and I'm going to tell you my Star Wars story, and now you'll completely relate to it. So there's this great scene in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. That was the very first one that came out in 1977, so I'm totally dating myself here. In this movie, Luke Skywalker is really put to the test. He's flying around in his X-Wing starfighter, and Darth Vader, the bad guy, is in close pursuit. And Luke has one chance to fire this seemingly impossible shot to destroy this wicked Death Star. And he has all kinds of like techie tracking equipment to help him, computers everywhere. And he has a whole team back in their mission command type area following his progress. But suddenly he hears the voice of his teacher, Obi-Wan Kenobi, in his head, telling him to use the Force. And Luke is unsure, but then Obi-Wan says, trust the Force. So Luke turns off the computer guidance system. He tells the team he's okay, he's got it. And instead of worrying or anything, they decide they trust him, and they start cheering for him. He puts his trust in himself and his training and his teacher and the Force within him. The team is showing their trust and support. He's got a psychologically safe environment in which he's willing to take a huge risk. And guess what? He makes the shot, and the Star Wars franchise lives on, of course. So Our day-to-day operations may not always feel quite that dramatic, but if we're willing and able to trust one another and work together and build those psychologically safe teams and organizations, we'll be able to do our best to take those risks and accomplish any mission to serve our veteran community. We have done a lot today, so let's review quickly. We went over what trust and psychological safety are, how relationships and teams and communication are impacted by trust and psychological safety and or the lack of them. For building trust, we went over several steps, keeping your commitments to yourself, keeping your commitments to others, and repeating those steps. And the 4 C's to demonstrate: capability and consistency for cognitive trust, caring and candor for effective trust. And I also gave you several tools or activities that you could use for building psychological safety in your teams, like the personal and manager user manuals, the social contract, and the team charter. So one last thought from Amy Edmondson: psychological safety at work doesn't mean that everybody is nice all the time. It means that you embrace the conflict, that passionate pursuit of truth, and you speak up, knowing that your team has your back and you have their backs. All of our sessions are based on scholarly research and the academic materials listed here. And again, you'll get the slides, so you'll be able to do additional research if you like on your own. And this is our QR code for the post-training evaluation if you happen to have a government phone. If not, the link will be available to you as well. And it's got 8 little questions and gives me a chance to look at your feedback and find ways to continue to make our training relevant and effective. And the survey is going to remain open for about 24 hours following our session, so we greatly appreciate any feedback you can provide. And we have about 2 minutes left, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Tammi. That was wonderful. And as Tammi mentioned, the recording will be posted on the Seed SharePoint along with the resources, the slides, and the manual. So appreciate everybody's time today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Seeds event.